Cystic mesothelioma is a rare type of mesothelioma cancer that develops from the thin layers of tissue that line the chest cavity, the pleura, and abdomen, the peritoneum. While the exact causes are still being researched, most cases are linked to asbestos exposure. Asbestos is the primary cause due to its long latency period between exposure and development of the disease, often decades. Therefore, avoiding or limiting exposure to asbestos is currently the best way to help prevent cystic mesothelioma. Asbestos is a group of natural silicate minerals that all contain thin crystalline fibers. Asbestos was widely used in many construction materials for insulation and as a flame retardant starting in the early 20th century through the 1970s. Common products that contained asbestos included pipe insulation, ceiling and floor tiles, brake pads, fireproof gloves and clothing, cement sheets and roof shingles. Asbestos fibers are able to penetrate deeply into the lungs and they cannot be broken down or removed by the body. This can lead to inflammation and scarring over time, which increases the risk of developing mesothelioma or asbestosis decades later. While asbestos was banned in many countries starting in the 1970s and 80s, it is still present in many older buildings and infrastructures that have not been remediated. Common places asbestos may still be found include older homes, schools, public buildings, and industrial sites constructed before the early 1980s. It was also commonly used in early automobile brake pads and gaskets. This means that people working in construction, demolition, building maintenance, shipbuilding, power plants and the automotive industry in past decades faced high risks of asbestos exposure. Family members of workers who tracked asbestos dust home on their clothing also had elevated risks. To prevent exposure to asbestos fibers, the key actions to take include the following. Avoid disturbing materials that may contain asbestos such as old insulation, floor tiles, roof shingles, plaster, fireproofing or soundproofing materials unless samples have been tested and confirmed not to contain asbestos. Do not perform any sanding, cutting or drilling yourself without proper protective equipment and containment. If remodeling or demolishing a home or a building constructed before the 1980s, assume materials contain asbestos unless tested and have all removal done by licensed asbestos abatement contractors. Do not attempt removal as a do-it-yourself project. Ask contractors and building owners to provide documentation that confirms asbestos testing and approved abatement protocols if any construction, renovation or demolition work is performed in your home or workplace. Oversight from local regulatory agencies is also important. Avoid activities such as collecting, playing or disturbing asbestos-containing vermiculite attic insulation, often mistaken for the gold or silver mineral. The expandable vermiculite and asbestos case in Libby, Montana exposed many people this way and is considered the worst environmental contamination from asbestos in U.S. history. Avoid activities associated with early vehicle maintenance such as brake work if possible. However, simply traveling in older vehicles does not pose a significant risk as long as the brake pads and materials are intact and not releasing dust. Newer vehicles rarely contain asbestos and brake pads. Ask your employer about any past or present asbestos exposures related to your job. Industries like shipbuilding, power plants, firefighting and industrial facilities had often significant historical exposures. Follow all safety protocols and use required protective equipment to reduce inhalation risks if asbestos may be present. Request documentation of exposure monitoring and abatement records. Avoid activities with potential risk of asbestos exposure when it was commonly used abroad. For example, construction trades in Russia, Eastern Europe and developing nations may have involved more historical asbestos use without regulation or abatement compared to North America and Western Europe. Taking safety precautions and avoiding do-it-yourself projects could help lower risks. Make sure any renovations or new construction meet current asbestos-free building codes and material standards. Many countries now ban asbestos outright in construction materials. Most contemporary insulation, flooring, roofing and other building products use modern asbestos-free formulations. but older existing construction potentially still contains asbestos until properly abated or enclosed. The U.S. federal government now classifies all forms of asbestos as a known human carcinogen and does not have any established safe threshold of exposure according to the Environmental Protection Agency and Occupational Health and Safety Administration. Therefore, avoiding any exposure as much as reasonably practical is prudent to help prevent potential future mesothelioma or other asbestos-related diseases from developing. Following these prevention strategies can go a long way in avoiding or minimizing exposure to airborne asbestos fibers, which researchers believe is a critical risk factor involved in the genesis of cystic mesothelioma and other cancers linked to asbestos. While trace environmental or incidental exposures may be unavoidable, making practical choices to limit occupation-related exposures or intentional disturbation of asbestos-containing materials when remodeling or demolishing older structures can help reduce mesothelioma risks over a lifetime according to current medical consensus. Continuing research into new causes may also identify additional targets for primary prevention efforts in the future. But avoidance of asbestos where possible currently stands as the best chance of preventing new cases of this rare but deadly cancer.